recipe. I'm using King Arthur Flour's classic challah recipe. I think that's how you say it, with a cha, good hard cha, because it comes from like Yiddish or Hebrew or something. Um, so I've got the recipe printed out here. So you can't really see that. But you can just Google King Arthur Flour Classic Challah, Challa, and that'll come up, or I think it's in the event post, a link to the recipe that we'll be using. And one really great thing about King Arthur Flour is that they are like a professional flour milling company, and they have professional bakers who develop their recipes. So they're very precise, they're very well tested. And the thing I especially like is that they give weights for the measurement. So instead of just saying like 1 cup of flour, they might say 280 grams of flour. And I used to think that that was kind of fussy. Like, why are we doing grams? I grew up using cups. And so that just kind of seemed like, I don't know, stuck up a little bit. But the thing is, flour, especially a lot of different substances, but especially flour, a cup of flour can be like a lot of different amounts actually. If the flour is really packed down, a cup could be like, I don't know, 300 grams or something. Or if you've really like stirred up your flour and so it's really fluffy, then it could be, 250 grams. So that's why if you have a scale, it can be really good to use it for anything where you're dealing with flour or liquids. And I actually now find it easier. It took me a while to get there, but I now actually like measuring things in grams instead of in volume. So we'll do a little bit of both today. I'll give you measurements for both. Good morning, Laura and Ryan and Will. It's good to see you guys. Well, not see you, but good to know you're here. So I was just kind of letting people know what's going on today. We're going to make a braided challah loaf. And challah is a really soft bread. It's great for French toast. In fact, I don't know if I'll actually eat any of it plain. I might just make all of it into French toast. But one of the things that makes it soft is that we have some different liquid ingredients. It's not just water. So let's get started. I'm going to switch the camera over so you can see the equipment. Okay, so I'm going to start with my liquid ingredients today, and that's because we have several of them. And so I want to kind of stir them together before we start adding flour. So the first one is going to be, if you look at the recipe, a 1/2 cup of lukewarm water. If you're using active dry yeast, you would want to take that warm water and add just like, I don't know, a teaspoon of sugar and put your yeast in there and let it sit until it gets foamy. And you can work on the other ingredients kind of while you're doing that. If you're using instant yeast, you can just go ahead and just kind of do all the liquid ingredients. So the first thing the recipe calls for is a 1/2 cup of lukewarm water. And the reason we want lukewarm water is that that is what the yeast likes. Remember, the yeast is a little organism. Sorry guys, trying to get like lukewarm water out of my tap. One of my friends actually refers to yeast as yeast beasties because they are essentially very tiny animals. So I have a scale here. I really like it. You can see, I don't know which way is best to orient it. So the way that I'm going to measure is I'm going to turn it on first. I think it's not, okay. So you can see there's nothing on it now, and so it says 0. Can you guys see the scale numbers, or are they too small? Just let me know. Okay, so then, but the thing is, if I'm measuring stuff, like I don't want to measure my bowl. My bowl weighs 408 grams, or like if I were using a measuring cup, you can see that weighs 97 grams. But I don't really want to deal with that. I could do math on it, addition and subtraction. It's not that bad. But instead, I'm going to hit tare, which tells the scale, pretend there's nothing on you. Just go back to 0. So that's generally what I do, is I kind of like put an ingredient in and hit tare to take it back to 0 and then add the next one. It is upside down. Okay. Thanks, Laura. Great. Okay. So now you can see, because this is actually a great way to practice positive and negative numbers, because I told it that this was 0, then when I take it off, it's saying it's at negative, should be negative 97, negative 98. Um, anyway, so if you have a scale, this is kind of a useful thing to do. I wonder if I have a smaller bowl that would let you still kind of see the numbers on this. I think I do. This doesn't make a terribly large volume of bread. Can you see still? If I pull it back like that? Well, I guess not. I don't think I can go any smaller than that. Sorry, guys. But yeah, so I'm going to hit tare now, and I'm going to add my ½ cup of lukewarm water, or in the volume measurements that King Arthur gives, it's 113 grams. So I'm just going to kind of like slowly pour until I get close. This is interesting because I'm looking at this upside down. Oh, I guess it doesn't like really help that much to have it upside down because you all can't see the numbers anyway. So that's 113 grams of lukewarm water. I'm going to turn this back around because, yeah, I don't know how much it helps. So 113 grams of lukewarm water. And then the next ingredient, I'm going to dump out this water because I want to use this measuring cup again. The next ingredient is a fat. The recipe says to use vegetable oil, and you certainly can do that. I learned, so this would be like canola oil, sunflower oil, whatever, just some oil that doesn't have a strong flavor. So I learned that part of the reason that challah traditionally has oil in it instead of butter is because of kosher laws. Challah is often used in Jewish meals, and they have rules about dairy and meat touching each other. And so if they had put butter into, I'm going to use some butter. If they had put butter into the challah, then if they were serving a meal with meat, they would have to work really hard to like keep everything from mixing, I guess. And so instead they just use oil. I'm going to use some melted butter because I think that's going to give it a nicer flavor. But you can use whichever you want. Either one of those is going to be fine. So that's 6 tablespoons of vegetable oil or 6 tablespoons of butter. So I'm just microwaving my butter right now to melt it. So that's in my microwave. I just used, I don't know, I'm going to try 45 seconds for melting 6 tablespoons of butter. I don't really know if that's the right amount of time. I always just have to check. So how's everybody doing this morning? Okay, it's ready. Oh no, it's not. Okay. My butter is not all the way melted, so I'm going to give it a little bit more time. 20 seconds. Okay. Yeah. So you can see right now, I told it that to zero out at the bowl, so pretend the bowl was nothing and then pretend the water was nothing. So together, the bowl and the water must have been about, it won't stay stable if I do that, must have been about 320 grams because now it's saying, so if you are like, I don't know, in middle school or something and they're doing negative numbers, you can just play with a scale. It could be really fun. Okay, sorry about that, friends. The stream ended unexpectedly. I've got a ½ cup of water in my bowl. Okay, cool. I've got a ½ cup of water in my bowl, and I have 6 tablespoons of melted butter. I'm just going to put in like that. And then I need a ¼ cup of honey. So this is a measuring cup. I could just do it by volume, just do a ¼ cup. And when you're measuring liquids, I feel like the volume measurements for liquids are pretty okay. I don't know, I think liquids don't like pack down in the same way that flour does. So I don't think it really makes a difference. I'm just kind of using the scale because, as I've mentioned, I've decided I like them. So I'm going to use 85 grams of honey. And I think honey is going to give the bread a really nice flavor. Okay, I got 84 grams. That's close enough. Okay, so I'm going to use a spatula to get this in here because it's really sticky. So did you know that the rate at which things pour is called viscosity? So honey has kind of a high viscosity, and that's why I pour so slowly, and water has a pretty low viscosity. So it pours pretty quickly. You're not really going to have to wait or use a spatula to get water out of something. But we do for honey. Have you ever thought about the fact that honey is a liquid, but there's no water in it? Like that there are like liquids that don't have any water in them? It shouldn't seem strange. I guess oil is like that, but the first time I thought about that for honey, I was like, oh, that's kind of strange. I just sort of assumed that it did. So our honey is in there. Next, I'm going to do 2 large eggs, or just, I don't know. Recipes say large eggs. I feel like that's a holdover from days when eggs used to be a lot of different sizes, and now most of our eggs are large eggs. Unless you have your own chickens, and a couple friends of mine actually just got their own baby chicks that they're raising so that they can have their own eggs. And I would not be surprised if their eggs come out different sizes and maybe even different colors. There's more to chicken eggs than just white eggs or brown eggs. Eggs can actually be like slightly green. So now I'm washing my hands because we know that eggs can have E. coli in them, which can make us really sick. So I'm just gonna wash my hands off after having dealt with that so that I don't contaminate the rest of my kitchen because I don't want to get sick and I don't want any of my housemates to get sick. Okay, so I'm assuming that whichever person cracked the eggs at home is also washing their hands. Okay, so we have all of our liquid ingredients now. I'm going to use a whisk and kind of stir these together. We don't have to get it really smooth because we are going to knead these together with the flour. Like we're still going to have to kind of fold it and fold it and fold it. But I just think it's going to be easier to do that if I have already at least broken up the egg yolks and then kind of like combined everything else a little bit beforehand. If you have a stand mixer and you have a dough hook, so this is what my dough hook looks like. This is a really great recipe to use them because the dough is pretty sticky. So I made the test batch earlier. I just kind of put everything into the bowl of my stand mixer and put the dough hook in and left it for, I don't know, 10 minutes or something. And then by the end it was really, really nice and stretchy and I didn't have to do very much with it. Okay, so that looks pretty much like kind of one uniform liquid, more or less. So I'm going to put this back on the scales. And now I'm going to add my flour. And as I mentioned, this is just regular flour. Let's put this over so you can see. It's just regular flour, just all-purpose flour. I think this is Kroger brand flour. If you're using cups as a measurement, you'd use 4 cups of flour. I'm going to use grams. So I've told my scale to go back to 0, and now I'm going to add 482 grams. Okay. Earlier I wasn't paying attention and I actually put a little bit too much flour into my bowl, but it was okay because I just sort of scooped some off of the top and put it back in the container. I don't know, maybe that's really terrible practice. I guess there are eggs in here, so that's probably not the best idea, but it's too late. Okay, 482, so I'm at 387. I try to slow down and put in smaller amounts when I get toward the end so that I can get a pretty precise measurement. Aha, yes, Laura's saying we put oil in the 1/4 cup to make the honey pour faster. Yes, that is a good strategy. I used to sometimes spray the measuring cup with baking spray, like Pam or whatever. I don't have Pam around anymore, so I don't do that, but it does really help. And then you don't have to use the spatula. Okay, so that's 4 cups of flour, and then I'm going to do 1½ teaspoons of salt. So just a teaspoon measure, kind of shake it off so it's flat. And then I'm gonna eyeball the second one. If you want, you can use like a half teaspoon measure, but I feel like it's gonna be fine. Just kind of look and see what I think a half teaspoon looks like. And then last but not least, we have our yeast. And this is a tablespoon, a lot of yeast. I think they're kind of just going for a fast rise here. Because, and maybe, well, I guess a fast rise, and then also I talked a little bit about how butter and eggs are going to slow down the yeast, and so I think they're just kind of trying to give you a little bit of a boost so you're not waiting forever for this delicious, delicious dough to rise and then shape it and all of those things. So I'm back. My video just ended suddenly again. I don't know what's going on with that. So sorry. I hope those of you that were already on can find it again. And hop on again. We are partway through making the dough for a nice challah loaf. So it has a nice little mound here. So I'm going to kind of knock down the top of that, flatten it out a little bit, and then I'm going to go like underneath the liquid and kind of pull some of the liquid up. There are different ways you can do this. I'm just kind of talking through what I'm doing in case you want to try this way. And like I mentioned, this dough is going to be a lot stickier than the other doughs that we've made. But when it all comes together, it's going to be like super smooth and nice and elastic. Okay. Just stirring through. Did you guys decide to use butter or honey in your loaf? I'm curious about what you decided to try. Oil is definitely a little bit easier. You don't have to melt it. It's just conveniently in a bottle already. Bethany says, oh, hey, Bethany. It's good to hear from you. When would you use the stand mixer? So I would take my stand mixer bowl and put all of the ingredients in it. And then just stick the dough hook in and start it up on low. Okay, Laura says they used honey and oil. Great. So I would just start it on low, and like even if you haven't really mixed everything, if you just leave it there long enough, the ingredients will kind of come together. It's sort of magical. The reason that I decided to kind of pre-mix the liquids and then add the solids was because I was planning to do this by hand, because I'm trying to show that you don't need a lot of fancy equipment to bake really nice things. So just kind of doing it the old-fashioned way. But yeah, the stand mixer is really nice. It makes it really easy. I just like turned it on and then put dishes away in my kitchen while it was going. It's definitely a lot easier. But if you don't have a dough hook, so again, here's what my dough hook looks like. If you don't have a dough hook, don't try to do bread. You could, if you wanted, I guess, put your liquid ingredients in the bowl with like a paddle attachment and kind of use, so this is my paddle attachment, and use that to stir them together and like add the flour and just kind of pulse it a few times, or not pulse it, like turn it off and on to get the flour and the oil and stuff to come together. But if you try to use the paddle, it will like actually just keep sort of stirring the, what do you call it? Stirring the dough together and like breaking up the gluten chains. And we don't want to break them up. We actually want to just build as many gluten chains as we can. And so the dough hook kind of acts, I guess, like we would when we're kneading things, whereas the paddle is more like a mixer. Okay, so I've gotten this to like, it's pretty well together. Kind of pumping up now. So now I'm going to get out a silicone mat. Those of you who have done a few of these videos know I really like my silicone mats because it makes cleanup so much easier. You can definitely still do this on your countertop. You can do it on a cutting board. But if you do that, you'll want to find some way to stick your cutting board down, because the last thing we want is our surface to be like moving around. So go like that. And then I'm just kind of like pushing it down to make sure that it's really stuck. All right, so I'm gonna put some flour down. This is the fun part. Ryan, Will, does your mom let you guys sprinkle the flour on the counter? Now that I've asked, now she's gonna have to, right? Okay, Laura says we are also using a mixer. Great. So you guys don't actually have to put flour on your countertop, just um, set it in with your dough hook and let it start. And I think it's really fun to watch dough come together. If any of you watched my English muffin episode, where like I didn't do that one live, there were like a number of sections where I was just like accidentally sort of staring into my bowl watching it. And I was like, oh wait, I was supposed to be like talking or like cleaning up my kitchen or something. But I find it kind of mesmerizing, kind of soothing just to watch the dough go around and around. So I'm doing this by hand. This isn't so bad. It's not that sticky. I guess because I pulled it together a fair amount before I did this. So I'm just kind of pushing it down to flatten it and then pulling one side up over and then pushing it again and then like fold one side over and then push it again. And it's going to start kind of resisting. You'll feel it getting tighter a little bit. And it starts sticking. For those of you who are doing it on a counter, just kind of like put some more flour down, keep going. If you're doing it in a mixer, it's not so much about the time. You should do it until your dough looks super smooth and elastic. Like you don't want to see any little wrinkles in it. You shouldn't see any flour. I had to kind of push the flour down. I had some sort of sticking to the sides of my bowl. So I just took a spatula and pushed that down in, and then it kept going. Just kind of mixed until there were no separate ingredients, until everything looked the same. And a lot of recipes, I'm trying to think, the King Arthur recipe actually says, I'm looking at my recipe now. Let's see. Oh, it doesn't even say how long to knead it. Often recipes will say like 10 or 15 minutes. Like this is not a joke. Like they really want you to knead the bread a long time. I read somewhere that it is possible to over knead bread. That has never happened to me as far as I know. And from what I've read, it doesn't happen. If you're kneading by hand, it would be next to impossible to over knead your dough. I'm not even sure like what that would mean. Like you have too much gluten buildup, but like normally with bread, we want a lot of the little pieces of gluten sticking to each other. Oh, I don't like that. So you can see it's tearing a little bit on this side. That means the gluten chains are breaking up. I'm a little concerned about that, but I guess I'm just gonna kind of keep kneading and see if maybe that goes away. The only thing I did that's different from the recipe is that I used butter instead of oil. And it could be that there's something I don't know that is coming clear at this point, but I think it'll be okay. I think I mentioned in another video, I think only ever once or twice have I made bread that wasn't edible. Like one time I underbaked it, and so it was like raw in the middle. But that was because I was working with a really bad oven. I had an oven for a while where the door didn't really close all the way. So it's really hard to keep your heat in your oven if your door doesn't close all the way. So I sort of stopped baking bread in that oven after a while. Okay, yeah, this is looking better. A little bit more flour. I feel like bakers must have really strong arms. I guess commercial bakers probably use like enormous mixers. So they probably aren't doing this by hand either. But I guess like amateur bakers who bake a lot at home probably have really strong arms from this. For a while I lived in Cameroon, and they used to use a lot of like very sort of manual devices for their food. So one was like a grinding stone. So it was like a rock kind of shaped like a cutting board, and then another like round rock. And you would put your herbs or your garlic on that and just like smash them and kind of like rub the rocks together. Or they had another thing to use for like mashing up potatoes or plantains. It was like a long tube kind of thing with a hole in the middle. So you'd like a long narrow hole. And so you kind of put your ingredient or whatever like into the thing, and you had a big stick and you just like go up and down and up and down and up and down. And one of my friends let me do it one time, I'm like going and going and going, and my arms got so tired, but I didn't want to admit to her that I was getting tired. And so, right around the time that I thought, oh, I'm going to have to tell my friend Shemin that I have to stop, she's like, okay, I think it's done now. I was like, "Whew, okay, I dodged that bullet. I didn't have to tell her that I'm weak." But she had really great biceps, very well defined muscles. And I think it was because she just like, even just daily life, even cooking, um, she was working out her arms much more than I normally do. Okay, so you can see here, this is getting really smooth. I'm still getting a little bit of tearing, so I'm going to kind of keep going and see if that'll go away. But yeah, yeah, it's like it's not tearing as much. And you can see I'm not actually having to put flour down anymore. It's just kind of releasing from the board on its own. So that's a good sign as well. Sometime I want to try making sourdough challah. And I know it has to be possible because like 100 years ago, or I don't know, 150 years ago, people didn't have commercial yeast like we do. So all of the bread had to be sourdough, like anything with yeast in it was just wild yeast they like caught in their home. So it has to be possible, but um, I haven't tried it because sourdough's kind of already a slower method, and then the eggs and butter slow down the yeast even more. So I feel like it would take a very long time. Laura says, should the dough feel very hard? Yeah, it should feel pretty firm. Like you can see, like I'm having to kind of put a fair amount of weight into it. Um, you can't see my arms, but like the muscles are like popping out as I do this. Um, yeah, so anyway, so I think it'd probably take a while to make a sourdough challah bread. But you know what? Like it's not like you have to stand over it the whole time. Like you just set up the yeast with all its friends, and then and let it go and come back later. For this, because it has eggs in it, you would have to do a lot of the rise cold. And I guess that would be the challenge because you can't leave eggs out for, 6 hours. That's not really safe. Um, but the good thing about sourdough is like that cold rise gives it a lot more flavor. I bet the sourness from the sourdough and the honey are really nice together. Um, Jen says that she wants to try to make sourdough as well. Jen, do you have a sourdough starter already? It's a fun little story. I've already told this a few times, but Laura, who is on this call, gave me some sourdough starter, and that is the starter that I've been using for like over a year now. And I just keep feeding it, and sometimes I neglect it and I forget to feed it for a month or so, and it's okay. I just keep it in my fridge so the yeast don't eat that quickly. They're kind of slow. Um, so then I know I'm talking to some people lately who are working with sourdough for the first time. They're like, oh, it's kind of scary, it's kind of hard, and it is a little bit at first. But over time, it gets to be like less nerve-wracking. I think it's like especially so now because it can be a little bit harder to find flour, and so none of us want to waste flour. Like ordinarily, flour is not that expensive. So if you did happen to make a loaf of bread that like wasn't as good as you wanted, or maybe even like you couldn't eat, like it's really not the worst thing in the world. You put some time into it, so that's sad. But right now, like I think we all need a little more stress relief, and so making a baked good that doesn't that didn't work is like extra stress. Nobody needs that. Well, this isn't really getting any smoother, um, so I'm just gonna leave it in a bowl, and I think the gluten it will start relaxing as it's rising. Um, So I think it will get smoother at that point. So I'm going to put it in a bowl, cover it up. Actually, I'm going to wash my hands again because the dough had eggs in it. So even though I can't see the eggs, my hands are covered in little bits of egg. So 20 seconds of hand washing. Does anyone have a song they sing while they wash their hands to like keep them accountable to actually wash for 20 seconds? I heard you can do happy birthday twice, but that seems kind of strange. So been thinking of using other songs. Also, Happy Birthday doesn't like, because it feels strange, it doesn't like lift my spirits, but there are other songs that I think I could use that would actually like make me feel a little bit better. Um, Jen says, sourdough is the #1 quarantine baking project I've seen. I am not surprised. Um, since, yeah, it's been a little bit harder to find yeast than usual. Um, oh, since it's harder to find flour right now, um, I haven't been able to find very much whole wheat flour, which I normally love to bake with. Um, but I looked on Amazon and you can buy like 25 or 50 pound bags of flour, which sounds like a lot, but like your average bag is like 5 pounds already. So 25 pounds is like, 5 bags. And so I was wondering if anyone in the Dallas area would maybe want to like split a bag with me. Like if I could get a couple people, then we could like order some whole wheat flour together and then I would drop it off. And we could have like a porch conversation where I stay 6 feet away from you. But at least I get to see you for a little bit. Okay, so I promised you that I would show you how to shape a loaf of challah into a braid. So here's the dough that I made earlier. It hasn't really grown that much. You can see here's the one we just made, and here's the new one. So it's actually kind of spread out more than it's risen, but I'm hoping that it will be ready for this step. So I'm gonna get a baking sheet so that I'm ready. So just like any kind of baking sheet, might want to throw a little bit of oil on it, or I'm going to put down a handy silicone mat. Okay, so here's the fun part. I'm going to get out my bench scraper and very gently get this out. Oh, it's pretty firm, but we're going to do it. We're going to make it work because it's really hard to ruin bread. And even if maybe this might be a little bit too early, I thought I was being clever and I put in a little bit less yeast than the recipe called for, partly because I had a little bit more rise time than it called for. But this is still, you can see like when I poke it, this is still very, very firm. But anyway, okay, so to make a braid, you can make a lot of different kinds of braids. We're just gonna do a basic 3-cord braid today. So the first thing is to kind of roughly divide your dough into even sizes. If I were a very professional baker, I would weigh these to make sure that they're the same size, but I'm not that professional. I like to use scales to measure my ingredients, but I'm not going to do that for this. Okay, so I have 3 pieces, and I'm going to kind of like make this into a loose ball. And then any guesses on what's going to happen next? More flour, because this is now like sticking a little bit more again. Okay. And okay, so I think it's pretty clear from the size of these that these are not like, not all exactly equal, but it's fine. So now I'm going to roll these into ropes or snakes. This is where it's kind of like playing with Play-Doh. And so I'm just gently like rolling this back and forth, kind of putting pressure on the middle and then like moving my hands outward. Since I've just messed with the dough again, the gluten is kind of tightened up. So if I want to get really long ropes, I could actually sort of partially form these and then let them sit for 10 minutes and the gluten would relax again. And then I could come back and stretch them more. And that's probably advisable, but I don't want to make y'all wait for that long. That would be one reason to try a different kind of video platform. I hear you can actually, like in Google Hangouts, we could all see each other and talk to each other. Yes, roll it into a long strand. correct Laura or Will or Ryan, whoever types that in. We could all see each other and talk to each other. And I feel like then it might be okay to kind of just like let the dough rest for 10 minutes and catch up on each other's lives. Okay, so that's stretching out pretty nicely. It's taking a minute, but it's stretching out pretty nicely. Okay, and then the next one. So I think the recipe says to kind of try to get this to like 20 inches. This is probably 12. I don't know. We'll do this next one and then we'll kind of see if we can go back over it again. So this is going to be a 3-stranded braid again because like the goal of this is to show that baking can be very simple, but you can also be very successful. If you want to go up a level, King Arthur Flour posted a video of how to do a 6-stranded braid. I have not tried that yet. I'm thinking about trying it with the other loaf later. So I can post a picture if I do that and let you know how it went. It looks really, really cool. It looks like very professional bakery, kind of like just lots of little lumps and pieces, kind of, well, lumps makes it sound bad, little mounds of dough kind of everywhere sticking out. It's very, very pretty. Okay. And last one. I think this one's bigger than the other two. And this dough is like, it's so nice to work with because it's so smooth. I did a multi-grain loaf with lots of like sunflower seeds and pumpkin seeds in it. And so, you know, it's fun, but like they're kind of like poking out of the dough, little pointy ends of the sunflower seeds. So it's not as smooth, it's not as elastic to work with as this is. So if you're looking for more of a Play-Doh experience, this is probably the way to go. Uh-oh. So I put too much flour down and now it's too floury, and so it's not really like, it's harder to roll it and get it to stretch. But we just keep going, and hopefully over time it will be okay. And it's kind of okay if this isn't perfect because once we shape this into a braid, we're going to let it rise again. And that rising process will kind of smooth things out. So even if we have like a little dimple here or there, or maybe a little, let's see, there's like a little wrinkle here, it's probably going to just sort of spread out. And if it doesn't, who cares? The bread will still be very, very delicious. So this dough is, it's very soft and elastic. It's going to be very delicious. It's like kind of halfway to a brioche dough. And a brioche dough has tons of butter in it. Like it actually has so much butter that you leave the butter out at first. You mix up like the eggs and the flour and stuff. And then slowly with your mixer running, you throw in like a tablespoon of butter at a time, and the mixer just kind of like goes around and around, and like the butter gets like kind of like sucked in and pressed in. And then you add another one. And I think it's like something with the gluten development that you need to do that instead of just pouring it in. But anyway, I didn't want to do that. It's not recommended to try that without a stand mixer, and I didn't know how many people had a stand mixer. So this is also going to be very delicious. And if you wanted to make cinnamon rolls, you could basically use this dough, the challah dough, and it's just kind of a different shaping technique. And obviously there's like the filling inside. So that is, I think next Saturday I'm going to do cinnamon rolls. If you want to do cinnamon rolls, I would love it if you guys did cinnamon rolls. What I really want to demonstrate is the shaping process. And I think it would be good if we did that together, but that would mean that it would be helpful if you started the dough like, I don't know, an hour and a half or 2 hours before the lesson, because then it would be ready like as, there's like, this is really weird. There's like, I think there was a bubble in here that then sort of like popped, and now it's like I don't know, it's weird. It's fine though, right? Because it's gonna rise. So yeah, if you start your dough next Saturday for the cinnamon rolls, like an hour and a half or two before, then it will have risen and it will be ready for shaping. And so we can all kind of do the shaping process together Um, and that way, if you have questions, you can ask me. And again, there's no trick to mixing up cinnamon roll dough. Again, it's just kind of like this. So if you were to like watch this video, well, now it's a series of videos because Facebook crashed a bunch of times. But if you were to just follow this recipe, just kind of mix everything up the way that we just have, you would have your dough for cinnamon rolls. Oh, can you see that? There's actually like a little bubble there. I'm gonna pop it because I don't think it's really supposed to be there. There we go, deflated. Okay. So I'm just kind of stretching these out to make them a little bit longer because the recipe said to try to do like 20 inches. So this is actually has like a ruler on it. I don't know if you can see it has like 1 inch, 2 inch, 8 inches. This is like 17, 18 inches. We're gonna call it good. Okay, so now comes the braiding part for ladies who have braided their hair. It's like very much similar to that process. I'm gonna kind of have it facing me like this because I guess that's like how I think about braiding. But you could put it sideways so it fits on your counter better. That'd probably be better. Okay, so I'm gonna attach this at this end. And then I'm gonna take, this is again, just like regular braiding. So I'm gonna take the middle and move it out to the side. And then I'm gonna take the middle and move it out to the left side. And so you can see we're actually getting different strands that we're moving, but it's kind of like always the middle that we're dealing with. So again, take the middle and move it to the right side now. And then move it again to the left side, or to the right side. Bring it over to the left. Now the middle strand to the right again. And then to the left. Oh, I guess like what I'm saying is like the opposite for you guys because this is upside down, sort of. I'm sorry about that. But anyway, you're like alternating sides like you would if you were braiding your hair or a rope or something. So then I'm getting to the end. Oh, it's not hard to see that. Bring that in a little. Okay, so I'm getting to the end and I'm gonna kind of just like do the best I can over here. So one thing you might notice is that this starts off with like really wide pieces here and then gets narrower and narrower and narrower. Try saying that 5 times fast. And so like when it rises, it's still gonna have this sort of like tight on one end, loose on the other end. So you can shape it like that, or there's a way to kind of get it so that it's a little bit more even on each side. So I'm gonna undo this, kind of flatten these out again. And the way to kind of get it where it like looks more even on each side is to cross the strands at the middle instead of at the ends. Okay, so I think this one's actually the biggest, so I'm going to put it in the middle because somehow I feel like that's going to help. Okay, so here you take the middle strand and go out to the side, and then the middle strand and go out to the side, and then middle goes out to the other side, goes out to that side, and it barely fits. Okay, so we've done that side, and then this is the only tricky part. So if I were to take my middle and go out to that side, it would be like I missed a side. So it actually has to go under. Yeah, there we go. That looks right. Okay. Yeah, and if something goes wrong and you don't like the look of it, you can just undo the braid, start over. Okay. Okay, so I guess on this side I'm kind of going under instead of going over with the middle. I was never very good at braiding hair. I do it sometimes, but it usually falls out. Okay, so I'm taking the middle and under here, and there we go. So now you can see like it's kind of bigger in the middle and smaller on the ends, but that means that it's like more, yeah, like it's more even kind of. Laura says, This dough seems denser and harder to knead than some that I have made. Yes, I think that's true. Um, so I think if you kind of just can get it to like that smooth state, then just leave it and it will loosen up over time. And then you'll be able to shape it later. Yeah, it does have less liquid, I think, than the sort of the regular yeast dough that we've made. And then I think like some of the liquid, like eggs, may act differently than water. I don't really know exactly how, but anyway. Once we have our braid done, I want to pinch the ends to kind of seal it. So I'm going to like pinch and twist a little bit on each end so that my braid doesn't come apart. But that looks weird, right? So we don't want that to show. So I'm just gonna kind of, oh, now that's loose. Okay, try this again. Pinching, pinching. Okay, there we go. Pinching, pinching underneath. And then this will kind of like, as it's rising, it will kind of seal itself on the bottom as well. Okay, so there's my braid. Just going to gently pick it up, put it on my baking sheet. And then this is going to rise for, let's see, this is going to rise for like 90 minutes to 2 hours, kind of until it's very puffy. So like right now, you can see if I press it, like it's very tight. Once it's risen more, if you poke it, you'll be able to kind of see like that you're pushing air down. And then I want to cover this up so that it doesn't dry out. Oh, let's talk about just before you bake. So just before you bake, have you, sorry guys, I'm gonna take a drink of water. If you're following the recipe, it talks about having a glaze made with a large egg beaten with a teaspoon of cold water. And so what that's going to do is like give you a nice shiny finish. If you've seen these sort of soft braided loaves in bakeries, they're often like really, really shiny on top. And so that's also kind of why they feel special. They feel very pretty. So when this is all puffy and risen, I'm gonna mix up my egg and my water and like gently brush it on with a brush. I guess obviously with a brush. And then if you want, another thing people often do with this type of bread is to put sesame seeds on top. So you just kind of sprinkle them over, and that'll give it a little bit of extra flavor. And I don't know, yeah, it just looks really pretty. And then you follow the directions in the recipe. So bake it at 375 for about 20 minutes. And it could get too dark, possibly. You don't want this loaf to burn. I've talked about how like some loaves, it's okay to let them get really dark. You probably don't want that for this. So if it starts getting really dark, but it doesn't seem done yet, you can lightly put some foil over it, and that will kind of protect it a little bit from the heat. Yeah, so it's bake about 20 minutes, and then after you've put the aluminum foil on, bake for additional 10 or 15 minutes. Anyway, it's all in the recipe from King Arthur Flour's website. So yeah, I guess I'm gonna cover this up. While I'm doing that, does anybody have any questions or comments? Have y'all had challah before? Anybody tried it before? No? Maybe? Okay. So I'm just gonna set this aside and yeah, let it rise. So it's about noon now. So I'm gonna check on this around 1:30 to see how it's doing. Okay. All right. Great. Well, thank y'all for joining me. Thank you for sticking with us while the stream crashed a couple times. So unfortunately, this video will be like 3 videos instead of 1 video. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward dough, except that it is, like Laura noticed, going to be very kind of tight and hard at the beginning. Um, but I think after that, it's pretty nice to work with, and the braiding process is, I think it's kind of fun. So, all right, I'm gonna sign off, but I will be watching my Facebook messages and kind of monitoring the group through the rest of the day. So, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a message and ask, and I will do my best to help you out. All right, thanks. Have a great day.